talk about forgiveness. It is something, it is an action, it is a verb that is never goes out of season. So I won't say much about it because there's a lot to come. So I wanted to introduce both our speakers, Leo and Wendell, to be speaking today to us about forgiveness, a new year resolution. Please.
Good afternoon, dear friends. It's very good to be here again, talking to you about such important topic in our lives. Leo is gonna talk a little bit about how he ended up with this idea, what moved him to this initiative to talk about forgiveness to you today. But I'm here for now just to introduce myself and ask Leo to come and give you the first ideas of this topic.
Thank you, Wendell. Good afternoon, everyone, into this beautiful good evening. Page 83. Yes, I want to keep this here open because Joanna De Angelis comes always to help us and guide us, right? I'm going to go back to this and just be ready here. Good afternoon again, good evening, and happy to be here as well. And a little bit anxious to bring some of the studies that we put together, some understandings that we put together, some of the topics that we find in Spiritism about this topic, right? Forgiveness. I want to just take back real quick the reason why we're talking about this. Funny enough, it was a talk, or interesting enough, I should say, it was a talk led by Wendell that, and I'll show to you during our conversation here today, why the idea came to mind. I didn't choose. I just felt the whisper in our ear saying, let's talk about this. But at the time, I didn't think we were mature enough to talk about it. And we said, let's go ahead and prepare this towards the end of the year. The same night when he was speaking, I think it was July, when he actually presented a topic to us here at the SSB, he said something that triggered me to talk about this, right? And to bring this idea to us towards the end of the year, for us to truly do this, to be a new year resolution. And then again, I'll connect with you. I'll show it to you. If I don't, remind me, and I'll certainly go over with you. Talking about forgiveness, and I speak for myself and for him as well, because we did discuss about this, does not mean that we are perfect, that we can forgive, that we do this well, that we are masters of this matter, right? And we had to study a lot because we know that it is a very difficult topic, and we'll go more into that. But before I say that, since it's a very difficult topic, we also would like to hold you for about 17 hours or so. That's how long it's going to take. No? Okay. Can I get at least an hour and a half? Okay. We'll try our best, all right? Because it's going to be a little bit longer than the usual hour, sometimes hour, 15 minutes that we have, because again, we have to cover a lot. Not in the intent to, exhaust all possibilities, all ideas about forgiveness, because there is a lot of information that we can cover. And then what I would urge ourselves is for us to do our own work, right? And for us to also continue this work next year and then the year following, because new things will come up. New situations, new problems, new invitations, right? That sometimes we propose to one another in this idea of forgiveness, right? We should continue. We should continue on to talk about this. So hang in there with us, please. And then we'll try our best to make sure that we open up our ideals about this. Another disclosure that I would like to bring to you is that the intent here is not to make us expert. Since we're not expert, guess what? You're not going to walk out of here today as experts of forgiveness. But at least, and this is something that we talked about, that if we can remember that there is a light called forgiveness inside of us, that for us would be the greatest gift that we can get for this holiday season, right? For Wendell and I, for each one of us as well, because it will enlighten the environment as we will see that there are several elements to this idea of forgiveness. There is a group of people that is related to the ideal or idea of forgiveness as well. So let us just remember this. Let us just bring this to our hearts and embark in this journey with an open heart to resolutions, right? This year of 2024, for me, and I'm being vulnerable enough to speak about it, was not easy. We had moments, we had situations in our lives that it was chaotic, it was difficult, right? And I hope I'm speaking for each one of you as well, because we're on planet Earth, right? It's going to happen. It's not something that we can run from it. Now, what we do, how we deal with it, is what it counts, right? What will how we behave now. This is something also that I would like to remind ourselves. How we behave now will also dictate what's going to happen next year, what's going to happen the next lifetime. As Joanna De Angelis mentioned on the message that we read before our prayer, right? The things that we leave it aside in this lifetime, not that we'll be able to go ahead and do everything, right? Guess what? We're going to have to pick it up the next lifetime, right? And they could be also things from the past. So let us take the baggage that we have brought with us tonight, right? For those of us watching us at home as well, let us take that baggage of the heaviness that we have been carrying, of the things that is still hurting us, and put it aside. But put it aside in a way that we can watch it, we can see it, not in a suffering way, not in a morbid way, but for us to really remind ourselves that we're there. On the other side, what I would like to ask everyone to do as well is to make sure, thank you, Daniel, is to make sure that we are also putting on the other side the moments, right? Because it's not a baggage, it's not a weight that we're carrying with us, of the moments that we have also been forgiven. The moments that that we can remember that we were given the grace, right, to say, all right, I'll give you another chance. Because we all have been on both sides, right? We have been on both sides. And to remind ourselves of these two sides, what I would like to do is to bring a parable. And let us accept this moment as well tonight as the work that we have been doing on the studies of Christ's teachings, right? Because we will bring a beautiful parable that I thought about telling the story myself, but I'm not a great storyteller. So I will share with you, and I'll read, because there are parts of this, several parts of this parable that Wendell and I will be talking about. It's the parable of the unmerciful servant. Many of you have seen this. If not, guess what? Here we are. It is also interesting because it brings us, it brings to light the moment that Jesus tells us how many times we have to sacrifice ourselves, to forgive. Because sometimes it can be very sacrificial, very difficult, right? So it starts like this. Then Peter came to Jesus and asked, Lord, how many times shall I forgive my brother or sister who sins against me? Up to 7 times? Jesus answered, I tell you, not 7 times, but 77 times. Therefore, the kingdom of heaven is like a king who wanted to settle account with his servants. As he began the settlement, a man who owed him 10,000 bags, pay attention to this, 10,000 bags of gold was brought to him. Since he was not able to pay, the master ordered that he and his wife and his children and all that he had be sold to repay the debt. So as we can see, he owed a lot of money. He owed a lot. When you have to sell yourself, your wife, your kids, and everything else that you have, it's quite a bit, right? At this servant, at At this, the servant fell on his knees before him. Be patient with me, he begged, and I will pay back everything. The servant's master took pity on him, canceled the debt, and let him go. So he begged for forgiveness, and he said, okay, fine enough. I'll give you that. But what happens afterwards? But when that servant went out, he found one of his fellow servants. Now is the servant going to outside and see another servant who owed him 100 silver coins. So look at the difference. What he owed, 10,000 bags, right, of gold. And here we're talking about 100 silver coins. He grabbed him and began to choke him. Pay back what you owe me, he demanded. His fellow servant fell on to his knees and begged him, be patient with me, and I will pay it back. But he refused. Instead, he went off and had the man thrown into prison until he could pay the debt. When the other servants saw what had happened, they were outraged and went and told their master everything that had happened. Then the master called the servant in, said, you wicked servant, he said, I canceled all that debt of yours because you begged me. Shouldn't you have had mercy on your fellow servant just as I had on you? In anger, his master handed him over to the jailers to be tortured until he should pay back all he owed. This is how my heavenly Father will treat each of you unless you forgive your brother or sister from your heart. Chapter 18, the Gospel of Matthew, from verses 21 to 35. So we see here, number one, the amounts that we already brought, but we see ourselves as we compare ourselves, as we bring ourselves into the situation of someone who is being judged, right? Consequently, in this case here, we're giving grace, right? And then we're also thrown into the other side where we are now in the position to judge and in the position to say yay or nay to that grace. And then we come to a point where Jesus talking to us of that time, and we are still stuck at that time, saying that the Father will treat us just like this. But there's more to that. We're going to analyze this idea later on in terms of will God really put us in the dungeon? We'll analyze that together, all right? We want to stop here. But the point is that we are in this circle right here. We are within these positions, right, of forgiving and the one to be forgiven as well, right? And often we miss the marks on both sides. Not saying only that we don't forgive, but others towards us as well. It's very true. And what is our position in that situation, right? So to further analyze this, we're going to put this aside and we're going to keep referring back to it as often as we can as well, not to lose our mark here. But what I would like to do is for us to take a 360-degree approach to the idea of forgiveness, okay? And what does that look like? Oh, going back. What does that look like? Let's analyze the people and the elements related to forgiveness. Okay, let us think as if we are in this room right here, right? My perception of the room is completely different from each one of you, right? Because of where you're sitting, because of your age, ideals of life, considerations of life, whatever. Each one of us will have a perception of what we're talking about and what we're doing here today, right? A great construct based on what we are, right? On what we think as well. So it's important for us to do this because it helps us in the process of forgiving, hopefully, okay? So what are they that we brought together? There is always the injured person, right? The one that is injured, the person who was hurt, right? And many times We see ourselves quite often on this, right? In this position, right? We are the injured person, right? Very seldom, we consider ourselves the transgressor. But we are, as many others are towards us as well, right? So there is a person who hurts and there is a person who is hurt, right? And between these two individuals, there's the act. And it's good for us to analyze this idea of the actual act, because we no longer, if we accept that there is an act, right? Number one, we start analyzing that the person is not the act, and the act is not the person, consequently, right? And then you start separating things. That person is not that act. That individual is not cutting me off, right? He does other things as well on the highway, right? He does other things as well. Maybe he did that unconsciously, because I know that he's not that act. He doesn't do that with every car. It just happened in front of me. It just so it happened that it was there, right? And I'm using a very small situation here, but it helps us when we start separating the individual, the transgressor, and the act, then we think a little bit differently. And the same thing with us. If we do something wrong that we feel ashamed, that we feel guilty, that we need the forgiveness, then we start saying, that was one act of my life. I don't have to feel to punish myself of something that I perhaps did once, that I feel ashamed, that I don't like to, that I disapprove what I did myself, right? People related to these parties, the same way that this individual is not the act, the transgressor, right? Either myself or another person. There are people related to these two parties. Let us think, and I'm talking about in the incarnated level. We're going to get to discarnated level. Let us think about that this individual who transgressed, towards me or did something to me, has a mother, has a father, is a mother, right? Is my sibling, right? So we have different individuals that are perhaps analyzing the situation, and very seldom they are also neutral about it. They will most likely pick sides. And when we're making a decision, right? When we have an intent towards positive things or negative things, whatever that may be, we're sending what? Energy towards one another. So if it is something that is very drastic, very difficult, guess what? If the forgiveness is not there, things will only escalate. Don't you agree? Whereas if we also analyze and say, you know what? It's a difficult moment. Let us pray for at least that. Then what happens? We start diminishing the ideas, the feelings that others also have towards this situation, towards this act. And because we don't separate the act from the person, we really put the label on the person, on the individual, right? What happens when that happens? The environment becomes toxic. If and Wendell will talk a little bit more about this, if the event is not well understood, let us just live at that. I'm not going to even say the forgiveness part, right? So the environment gets heavy. Our lives gets heavy, right? And then there is spiritual side of this as well. And we talked about the loved ones that we have in this side, but we also, as spiritists, we acknowledge what? That we have other friends on the other side, friends between quotation marks, right? That not necessarily they're very friendly, right? If I commit something towards Wendell, and Wendell have, if I have those friends that are the obsessors of life, what will these obsessors most likely do towards us? They're going to incite him not to forgive me. They're going to work with him because they don't like me either. So that now they're gaining another enemy. We have to acknowledge that as well. And we're going to talk more about this as well. And as Joanna DeAngeli mentioned, right, we also have to acknowledge the past, the present, and the future as well. If we have something from the past that perhaps happened way, way back there, that we could not take care of it, and we'll bring it to this lifetime, our present, for sure, we'll find some difficulties with some individuals, some situations that perhaps we don't know why we feel adverse to certain things in life, right? And what will happen? We'll look at it and say, oh my gosh, I feel so uneasy about this whole thing, right? And if I don't listen to what the heart is saying, to the commands of life, right, is saying to me, what's going to happen? My future, my present will be obviously not happy, and my future will continue to be the same of my past. So I wanted us to take this 360 approach, and there's way more that we can talk about it, but for us to, when we are in the position of either the injured person or the transgressor, that we also take in consideration these other points. Let us think about it. I know it's hard, because especially when you're hurt, for you to stop and detach yourself from the environment, sit back and watch the scene as you truly analyze yourself, right? As we're watching a movie, it's very hard because you're in it. You're in the movie, right? So let us try to do this, and hopefully this will also help. The other point that I would like to bring is, besides making this analysis on these points over here, is instead of telling you what it is, because it's really, really hard for us to tell what forgiveness is, because it depends on the hurt, it depends on these elements and many more, the time that we have been suffering, right? Because it can be endless, right? Sometimes we go through a situation of our lives that lasts for 6 months, but those 6 months, good Lord, it's like an eternity, right? Whether we're on this or that side, it doesn't matter, right? So we want to analyze what forgiveness is not. And this is important as well, as Wendell will develop a little bit more on it too. But I want to share a couple things with you. And I keep missing this. So, forgiveness is not to approve the unfortunate action. If somebody hurts us, if we think that, okay, approve this, it's okay, no, it's not okay. It's definitely not okay. There's something wrong. That act is an act that led us to be apart, right? To be hurt, to be down. So how can I approve such a thing, right? And we see parents doing this with kids. We see brothers and sisters doing this with kids. We see us in society accepting things that it's unexcusable in the sense of the act, not the person, right? It shouldn't happen anymore. 2024, it should not be happening anymore. And I give the time because it's to really remind us that we have enough moral knowledge that is available to us that we can balance things out and say, wait a minute, no, it's by far too much. It's not to accept, to say, I'll move on, or even fake it that everything is okay. We cannot just brush it off and say, oh, everything will be fine. Tomorrow's another day. Yeah, tomorrow's another day. But guess what? I'm hurt. Guess what? The other individual is hurt. And remember, we need to do this on both sides. That's why we look at the elements. I have feelings that need to be acknowledged. I will not lie. I went through this many, many times. It's okay. It's fine. No, it's not fine. I'm hurting right now. Will you forgive me? No. I don't want to forgive you. And it's funny enough, I was listening to a talk of Divaldo Franco, and he says something, but you're a spiritist. Yes, that's another topic. Let's not go there. Let's not start something else. But I will not forgive you right now. I need time. And time will be given to all of us that will be able to look at things in a much different way to say, that actor was really, really bad, right? And quoting Mr. Alahat as well, for many of you who know him in Brazil, It is that moment that we get to talk about the issue, but we don't cry. We don't feel hurt. We don't feel anything about it. We say like, yeah, it was tough. We may even say that, but we say it and our hearts are okay. It even mentioned that our blood pressure doesn't go up, right? When we can say that, then it's okay. Then we have forgiven, right? But it is not the idea that we have, that we allow ourselves to accept, that is, everything is okay. No, we need to go through that moment. Now, how long we get stuck with that madness, that anger, is what matters, right? Continuing. It's not to keep an attitude of superiority towards the wrongdoer or even the act. This is the point that Mr. Wendell, when he said this in the talk back in July, that I said, let's talk about forgiveness. This is it right here. And it is so true, because sometimes we think that, okay, forgiving is now, okay, this person did this, I'm much better than this person. I'll forgive, but this person is despicable. Or the act, or even the act. If we go back to the teachings of our Master Jesus, when he goes and talks to the woman and those who want to stone her, what happened there? Perhaps the men they were not adulterous, right? At that time, and still nowadays, men can be adulterous. The women could not. They had to be stoned, right? But they were not perhaps adulterous, but they did other things that are as bad or even worse than the women did. And what happened to them? They walked away. Jesus at that moment was able to show them that they were no better than the women and they were no better than the act. So it's not for us to put ourselves in this superior state towards the person or towards the act. It's not just saying I'm sorry or forgiving that everything will be okay. Or receiving the I'm sorry, I forgive you. There's way more than that. In this beautiful book, The Heaven and Hell, part 1, chapter 7, entitled, the part is entitled The Future Punishment According to Spiritism, the Penal Code of the Future Life. There are many, many items on this. I really ask you to read this because this is amazing. It frees us from the idea of guilt. It frees us from the idea that we'll be eternally punished by our Creator. And the teaching is that even though repentance is the first step towards regeneration, it's not enough by itself. Expiation and reparation are still required. Repentance, expiation, and reparation therefore comprise the 3 necessary conditions for easing the remnants of a wrong and its consequences. Repentance softens the rigors of expiation because it awakes hope and prepares the way for rehabilitation. Only reparation, however, can allow the effect and thereby destroy the cause. Otherwise, forgiveness would be an act of grace alone and not an annulment of the wrong. So, it's a law that our Creator have established for us. It's not a punishing law because we put the connotation to law that it's something bad, right? But it's a guidance. Let us think of it as a guidance, right? I do something wrong. I will have to repent, right? I'll have to say, I'm sorry. I did something wrong. I have to understand or recognize this, right? Ask for forgiveness, I should say. And then there will be the expiation moment here. It is the moment that we go through the consequences of my action. Whatever I caused will create mental and physical consequences. And through that moment, I will be suffering because I will see not only the person, but also the group of people that my act have hurted in the past. Until I create a different perception about the whole thing and say, I need to repair this. And I'm also giving the opportunity to repair it. And that sometimes can take several lifetimes. There is a beautiful book by Andrea Louise called Sex and Destiny that I urge you to go and read it as well. We have study here at the SSB that it tells the story of this amazing cases. Let's call it tells it's several cases within itself, right? That it develops, and we see how connected they are, and it was caused by one individual, and one individual only. But I'm not going to tell you anymore, because otherwise I would have to give you the whole book in, right? But we want to remind ourselves of this part as well, because it is within this that we learn that we need to be in this position of forgive and to be forgiven as well. Because if we forgive, the repentance will be much faster. The expiation won't be as long for that individual who hurted us. And the reparation will be much easier. And the same thing comes to us. Now, will this process happen if there is no forgiveness? Yes. Because God will allow the one who repents to say, even though so-and-so didn't forgive you, you are doing your job. You asked for forgiveness, didn't happen. Okay. It's the other person's problem now. It's not ours. Because we also need to develop ourselves. We cannot be in an eternal punishment, right? Punishing ourselves because the other person did not did not take the time to forgive us. We need to continue on. And that goes for any relationship. That goes for any partnership that we establish on planet Earth, which most likely it happened prior our reincarnation, right? But at this point, I would like to pass the word to our friend Wendell to give a continuation, and we'll come back soon.
Okay, guys. I want to start asking you to forgive me for using my notes. I have so much information here. I don't want to miss anything. It's difficult to me to remember everything, especially in English. So, after all this precious information that Leo shared with us, helping us to understand what is forgiveness, what's not forgiveness, the elements of forgiveness, I'd like to share some more thoughts about this topic with you guys. And the first one is that forgiveness is not only a recommendation, but a duty. Please, I'm not here saying that forgiving is so simple and easy, right? But it's urgent. I was talking to Leo yesterday. We were making some adjustments, and he said something that caught my attention. We urgently need to include forgiveness in the agenda of our incarnation. Because sometimes we just pretend that there's no one to forgive, that we don't need to be forgiven by anyone or by ourselves. So it's time to think about it. So we won't have to think about it in the future, maybe in the spiritual plane, right? And why we come to the conclusion that forgiveness is our duty? Because not only at one opportunity, but at several times, Jesus talked to us about forgiving. In his most well-known prayer, called the Lord's Prayer, Jesus taught us to talk to God and ask him to forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespasses against us. Right? So by saying this prayer, we not only ask for God's forgiving, but we commit to forgive our offenders. And if we commit, we have to try to fulfill it, right? Otherwise, there's no point in saying this prayer. When Jesus was dying on the cross, facing so much ingratitude and injustice, he was capable to ask God, Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they are doing, as it's written in Luke chapter 23, verse 34. When Kardec, on question 88.6 of the Spirit's book, asked the spirits what's the true meaning of charity according to what Jesus taught us, they answered, benevolence toward everyone, indulgence toward the imperfections of others, and forgiveness for offenses. That's the real meaning of charity. And there's no way to progress, to be saved, without charity. We have talked about this in this talk that Leo were referring to. I think the name was Salvation According to Spiritism, and we said that it's not out of the church, out of the truth, but out of salvation that there is no out of charity that there is no salvation. And the parable of the unmerciful servant. You know, when Peter asked Jesus how many times he was supposed to forgive his offenders, and Jesus said, not only 7 times, but 77 times, which means countless times. Every time you are offended, you have to forgive. Right? So we need forgiveness. So we need to forgive others. Otherwise, we are going to be severely judged in the future. Not by God, because as Jesus taught us, God is not that cruel being that wants to take revenge of our bad acts. But at some point in the future, we're going to have to account to someone or to something, which is our consciousness. Because also according to what Jesus said, we're going to have to pay up to the last penny. Right? So that's why it's so important to include this topic in the agenda of our incarnation. Nevertheless, we know that forgiving, it's not easy. It's not simple, right? And why? Especially depending on the level of the offense, it's really challenging to forgive someone. And why is it so difficult to forgive? There are some obstacles to forgiveness that arise from several causes: emotional, psychological, and situational reasons. And I have listed some of them to talk to you about. The first one is pride and ego. A sense of superiority or the need to be right can prevent us from forgiving. Holding on to grievances can serve as a way to maintain a perceived moral high ground. So the sense of superiority that Leo talked about before. Our ego makes us think that we are superior or more evolved than our offenders, and make us forget that we are so far from perfection yet, right? Maybe we are not capable of doing the same thing that our offender did. But we must remember that we are still very likely capable of making so many different mistakes every day. And we keep making them, right? So what's the difference between our offender and us, especially if you decide to revenge? In the book, In the Greater World by Chico Xavier, André Luiz tells a story about Paulo, who was adopted by Albino as his son. Paulo decides to kill Albino to inherit his money. And then Albino gets determined to revenge, to make Paulo die and bring him back to a spiritual plane where he can take revenge. And this become an obsession. This become the most important goal of Albino's life, make Paulo suffer. And then there is this character, Cipriana, who is a more evolved spirit, that she asks Albino, so you tell me now, what's the difference between you two? At the end of the day, there's no difference between who committed the crime and the one who takes revenge, because both of them get their hands dirty with blood, right? Chico Xavier once said that I get sad by being offended by someone, but I would be even sadder if I was the one offending, right? Hurting someone is terrible. So let's try to come down from the throne of perfection, right? And see that we are also capable of harm someone and need their forgiveness. Another obstacle is deep emotional hurt, right? And when wounds are profound or caused by someone close, the pain can feel too raw or overwhelming, making it difficult to let go. And here I have some observations here about it, that it has to do with our expectations, right? Regarding the ones who are close to us, the ones we love and care about, our expectation of being respected, loved, of loyalty is higher than to the ones we barely know, right? And maybe the reason for that, it's because we are not yet ready to give without receiving in return. When we give, we expect to receive it back, and we don't receive it back, we get disappointed, we get frustrated. There will be a point in the future when we are ready to give without expecting anything in return, that there will be no need to forgive, because we won't get offended. The only reason we need to forgive so much is because we get offended so easily. We are very fragile beings. Desire for justice or revenge. We often feel that forgiving means letting someone off the hook or condoning their actions, leading to a reluctance to forgive until justice is served. And what's the matter about that? Do you guys think that justice and revenge are the same thing? The ones who think that is the same thing, raise your hand, please. Nobody think, right? So there is this very famous spiritist, Brazilian spiritist speaker, Haroldo Dutra Dias. Most of you guys may have heard about him. He says that he likes very much the title of the Marvel's movie, The Avengers. He says that he thinks very accurate, because according to him, retaliation is not an act of justice, it's an act of revenge. And the problem about applying the law of retaliation, an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, to make justice, it's because it never stops in just one eye or just one tooth, right? There is this quote attributed to Mahatma Gandhi when he says that an eye for an eye would only make the whole world blind, right? So, and that's because those who seek for revenge, they always exaggerate in their acts. Because by revenging, they give way to the worst and most basic instincts, right? I'll give an example here. Let's pretend that Leo and I, we go on a fight, and Leo cuts one of my fingers. And I decide to retaliate in the same way. In that case, I will very likely not cut him just one finger, but two, right? And look at the trap here. In my mind, I was just collecting a debt of one finger. But by doing so, I was really incurring in a debt of two fingers. And it doesn't end here. Leo is gonna think, that's not fair. I cut him just one finger and he cuts me two. Now I'll cut him three. So this cycle never has an end, right? As long as this process keeps repeating, these two spirits will never get even. And they will end up building this vibrational connection that will put them together in very miserable conditions for ages, for centuries, in both planes, material and spiritual, right? So we should leave justice to the ones in charge of justice, right? Because they are more impartial. That's why it's not recommended that we advocate in our own case, even if we are a professional for that. And I can talk about myself. I can talk from my own experience here, because I used to work as an attorney in Brazil for a while, some time ago, and I faced some situations where I needed to sue someone or some company, and I decided to do it by myself because, well, if I'm a lawyer, why do I need to hire a lawyer for that, right? And because of that, I wasn't able to pay attention in some technical details because I was so involved in the cause that I was led by my emotions, right? So the ones outside the situations are always more appropriate to take care of it. And I ask you guys, let's imagine that you are facing a situation when you were offended by someone. It's not a situation of take legal actions, right? You decide not to revenge. You decide not to seek justice through your own hands. Who do you expect to take care of it? You were offended. It's not a legal case. You decide not to do anything, but you expect someone to take care of it, right? Who is this person? Who is this? God, right? It's the divine justice. And I ask you again, is there anyone more fair or more capable of reaching a fair solution to this than God? No. And why do we insist in stealing God's role? Don't we trust him or her? I'm sorry. I'll treat God as Dan, okay? It's more neutral. Don't we trust Dan? Don't we believe that one of God's attributes is being infinitely just and good? Right? God expects us to be co-creator with them. And there are so many roles that we can play in this process of co-creation with God. But most of the time, the only role we are interested is in the role of the judge, right? So we need to be careful not to target justice and end up hitting revenge. Some more obstacles. Lack of empathy. Without the ability to understand or consider the perspective and circumstances of the offender, forgiveness can feel unattainable. And what is empathy? It's trying to put ourselves in others' place, right? But sometimes, and when we do this, when we put ourselves in others' place, sometimes or most of the time, we will realize that in the position of our offender, we would have done the same thing, exactly the same thing, right? Because, guys, we are not angels. There is a reason why we are incarnating in a world of trials or in expiations, in the same world, in the same planet as our offenders. We may not be able to imagine ourselves doing in their place, in their position, in this current life, in this current incarnation. But we need to remember that we have lived before. And we have committed so evil acts, maybe against this person including, right? So it's necessary that we try to walk in our offender's shoes and analyze really honestly if we wouldn't have done the same thing as they. And maybe this can help us to forgive better. Fear of vulnerability. Forgiveness often requires confronting emotions and the possibility of being hurt again, which can be intimidating. Well, this has to be with our lack of understanding of what forgiven really is. Because, okay, we can forgive someone and not go back to the same position we were. And in that case, we don't need to be afraid of being hurt again because we are not going to be there anymore. Does it mean that we didn't forgive? No. It's just, I don't feel comfortable. I don't trust anymore. I don't want to be there. So, okay. Right. Divaldo Franco says something really interesting about forgiving and forgetting. He says that forgiving is a matter of sentiment. Forgetting is a matter of memory. is a physiological matter, right? So doesn't forget doesn't mean that you didn't forgive. Okay, so we need to reflect a little bit about on this the meaning of forgetting, right? Leo, talk a little bit about that. So keep remembering what happened is Jeanette did something bad to me. I can even talk to her, I can even see her that I will remember. Remember in a way that it will cause me pain. It's not just remember. It's remember and resent, refeel, if I can say this word, the same things that I used to feel when it happened, right? So forgiving doesn't have necessarily to make you vulnerable. You can just move on. Cultural or social expectations. In some cultures or groups, forgiveness may be viewed as a weakness, discouraging people from pursuing it. Let's pretend that a man was cheated by his wife with his best friend, and everybody got to know it. His co-workers, his friends, his family. Do you believe that in this sexist society that we live in, this man will be able to decide about forgiving or not without taking into consideration others' expectations and opinions? I don't believe so. I think that he will take into consideration. And it's a shame, right? Um, letting that others' expectations and opinions led your decision to such important things regarding your life. Misunderstanding forgiveness. Confusion about what forgiveness truly entails, such as believing it requires forgetting, reconciliation, or condoning wrongdoing, can prevent someone from taking steps to forgive. And that's what I said before, right? Not always forgiving has to do with forgetting and go back to the same position. You can just, right? So when you understand what forgiveness really is, what are the elements of forgiveness, it helps you to be more encouraged to forgive, right? Because you won't be afraid, "Oh, okay, so I'm confused about it." So once we succeed to overcome all the obstacles to forgiveness, what are the benefits that this act can bring to my life? And here I must tell you that I was really surprised about what I learned researching for this talk, right? By releasing sentiment and anger, we can experience a range of positive outcomes, such as emotional healing, reduce negative emotions, letting go of anger, resentment, and bitterness can lead to a sense of relief and peace. Increase positive emotions. Forgiveness can cultivate feelings of compassion, understanding, and empathy, improving overall emotional well-being. The Hindus, I'm sorry if I'm not pronouncing correct, Hindus, they say that the ones who don't forgive, they live carrying a burning ember in their hands, ready to throw at their offenders. But they fail to realize that while carrying it, the ember is burning their own hands. And Haroldo Dutra Dias says that not forgiving is like drinking a poison to kill someone else, while forgiving is a present that you give someone else, but who really receives is you. Right? So forgiving help us to release these feelings that are more harmful to ourselves than to others. Mental health improvement, decreasing stress and anxiety. Forgiveness reduces the mental burden of holding onto grudges, which can lower stress levels. Better mood, letting go of grievances often results in improved mood and a more positive outlook on life. Reducing risk of depression. Forgiveness is associated with lower rates of depression and rumination over past hurts. So there are many people talking about forgiveness and associating this act with emotional healing and mental improvement. There is this article uh, called Forgiveness Can Improve Mental and Physical Health, published in the American Psychological Association magazine, where this doctor, this PhD, Everett Worthington, he says that forgiveness, quote unquote, forgiveness is a topic that's it's psychological, social, and biological. It's a true mind-body connection. I had never thought about this, right? And it has so much to do with our mental health improvement. Physical health benefits. Lower blood pressure. Forgiveness can lead to reduced stress response, which help us regulate blood pressure. Improved heart health. Emotional release through forgiveness has been linked to better cardiovascular health. A stronger immune system. Chronic stress and resentment weaken immunity, while forgiveness strengthens it. And better sleep. Letting go of emotional pain can result in improved sleep quality and duration. When I learned all of this, I started to look for someone I need to forgive. Oh my God, I need to forgive someone. I need to forgive someone urgently. In this book, The Conscious Being, by Divaldo Franco, Joana de Angelis bring us some thoughts and reflections about the importance of forgiveness to our physical body. When the mind harbors conflicts, resentment, and prolonged hatred, the reactive darts it fires disrupt the cell's natural automatism, causing them to degenerate, and giving rise to various types of tumors, especially cancerous ones, due to the deadly energy burden that assaults them. Disguised acts of revenge turn against the physical and mental health of those who nurture them, producing cruel ulcers and pernicious emotional imbalances that push the individual into desolate states. In these states, they unconsciously take refuge with a sense of satisfaction, despite outwardly protesting their futile pursuit of well-being and balance. So it's interesting, this word she uses here, disguised acts of revenge. Because sometimes we think that we are not revenging, right? We are going to read a story in the end that will make us think about it a little bit better. So it's very important to think about it, right? Because let's think of how many symptoms and not diagnosed disease have their roots in these unsettled situations in our life that depend on an act of forgiving, right? Enhancing relationships. Healing and restoration. Forgiveness can repair damaged relationships by rebuilding trust and fostering communication. Strengthened connections. Practicing forgiveness makes relationships more resilient and reduces conflicts. Increased empathy. Forgiving others encourages understanding their perspectives, deepening emotional bonds. And you may ask, so why is it important to take care of our relationships? Why do we need relationships? If my relationship with you is not good, okay, I can move on, right? We are all ruled by the law of society, right? According to which everyone will, all of us were created to live in society. That's the information we are going to find in the question. What's the question? 766 of the Spirit's book, right? So in order to progress, to evolve, we need to coexist, right? Because it's not possible to evolve significantly by living isolated from others, because we lead with different point of views, different opinions, right, to develop some virtues in our personality, like tolerance, patience, forgiveness, and etc. Right? So, and we need to understand that from every relationship, conflicts can arise, and some of them are going to demand some forgiveness from us, right? So when we understand this, we can make the most of our relationships in order to help us in our process of progress, right? The more we learn to forgive, the better we relate, we live our relationships. Spiritual growth, alignment with values. Many spiritual traditions like Christianity view forgiveness as a virtue, bringing individuals closer to their beliefs. So as I said before, Jesus has taught us that forgiveness is not only a recommendation, but a duty, right? If we follow a doctrine that states forgiveness as a duty, and you don't make any effort to fulfill this duty, we are not aligned with the principles of this doctrine. We don't feel part of it. Sense of freedom. Forgiveness often brings a sense of liberation from past grievances, leading to inner peace. Imagine yourself stuck in a bad moment of the past, sometimes from remote lives, remote incarnations. And only because of this incapacity of forgiveness, you cannot leave it in the past. And it ends up interfering in your current life, in the way you see life, right? It's like you are resenting that pain every day, every time, and you can't get rid of it, right? Increased compassion. Forgiveness fosters a spirit of kindness and reduces tendencies toward judgment or revenge. And why do we need to act with compassion? Because Jesus told us, do not judge, or you too will be judged. Some more benefits of forgiveness. Personal growth. Enhanced self-esteem. By forgiving, individuals often feel empowered and less defined by the hurt they've experienced. Sometimes the frustration, the hurt was so bad, so damaging, that it can affect our self-esteem. And when we get stuck to that feeling, so we can leave that low self-esteem pattern behind, right? And we start to think it's okay, it's normal, we get used to it. And how many opportunities in life we lose because of our lack of self-esteem, right? Resilience. Forgiveness builds the ability to recover from emotional wounds and face future challenges with strength. Challenges. Who in this current level of our existence is free of challenges, is free of struggles? We all need struggles, because while we are not ready, we don't learn to progress through love and service, we're gonna need struggles to promote our inner transformation. And the offenses that others do to us in life are part of these struggles. We need to learn to be resilient toward these offenses. The more we forgive, the more we learn to be resilient, and the lower is the pain we feel. Another benefit, border social benefits. Conflict resolution. Forgiveness can de-escalate tensions and promote harmony in families, workplace, and communities. That topic about environment that Leo said before. How bad is an environment tainted by conflict, right? It can be in your family, in your workplace, especially in the place that you have to be most of the time. Sometimes people live under the same roof and they don't talk to each other. Sometimes you work with someone and you can talk to them, you can exchange, you can share an idea. right? Just because a lack of forgiveness. It's so uncomfortable to say the least, right? We can also lose some opportunities because of that. Encouraging forgiveness in others. By modeling forgiveness, individuals can inspire others to adopt the same behavior, fostering a more understanding and compassionate environment. Have you guys thought about how much you influence the ones who love and admire you? How much your actions and examples are shaping the personality of your children, your nephews, whoever, right? When we don't forgive, and even worse, when we are proud of it, when we say, I don't take for any nonsense, and you tell your children, do the same. If someone says something to you, say the same, their face. Don't come to me to complain. Defend yourself, right? If we act like this, how are we gonna expect forgiveness from others in the future, especially from the ones that learn from us? Okay, Wendell, I now acknowledge the benefits of the forgiveness, but how can I achieve it? Is there any tool that I can use to help me cultivate this habit of forgiveness? Yes, I have collected some of them. Understanding the real meaning of forgiveness. These help us acknowledge better what must be expected from us when we decide to forgive, the boundaries of forgiving. Okay? Am I capable of it? Okay, so now I can forgive. Prayer and meditation. This practice align us with higher vibrations and foster inner peace, helping us to let go of resentment. Guys, let's not forget the influence that we have from and to other spirits, right? We are in this interchange with them, influencing and being influenced. Sometimes we even want to forgive, but we have this devil in our shoulder, right? We have the angel and the devil in our shoulder. And sometimes we just have to pray to release these bad thoughts from our mind. Self examination. Through self awareness and reform, we can identify the pride or selfishness that hinders forgiveness. We need to know ourselves. We need to know that we are not perfect and why. So when we are offended by someone and we stop and look at ourselves and really think honestly, you know what? I would have done the same. So this is a very good tool to help us forgiving others. Charity in thought and action. By extending kindness to those who wrong us, we shift our focus from resentment to compassion. So this charity in thought and action is toward our offender. Can you imagine that? Someone offend us and we not only forgiven, but we act with charity. We make him the good. Isn't that great? Seeking spiritual guidance, communication with our spirit guides through prayer or mediumistic message. Uh, I would switch this mediumistic message to the inspiration that we seek during the phenomenon of the emancipation of our souls when we go to sleep, right? Because we don't usually seek for mediumistic messages, right? That's not why we come to the spiritual center. That remembers a very funny fact that a friend of mine, his mother, when she knew that I was spirit, she said, "Oh, you go to spirit center? Oh, I wish I could get some news from my father." As it was like that, right? Or I go to the spirit center and I have a message from someone. So we don't need some message specifically, right? Before I go to sleep, ask for inspiration. When we are sleeping, only our physical body is sleeping. We are not. We keep, you know, uh, living with the spiritual guides, right? So it's a good moment to seek for spiritual guidance. And here some spiritual, some considerations about forgiveness in the spiritual world. Because as Leo said, as spirits, we must remember that life doesn't end with the death of our physical body, right? We die and we keep alive in the spiritual plane. So, and usually we go to the spiritual plane at exactly the same way we are here, feeling the same things, good or bad. It's not that we die and everything is settled. No. All our fears and angers and resentment we take with us, right? So we need to think about it. The role of forgiveness in the afterlife. Spirits burdened with resentment may remain tied to the material world. Forgiveness helps us then progress to higher realms. Right? Remember the example I gave you about Leo and I in these relations. One cuts the other's fingers and it has no end. The one who dies first keeps here because of the one who is still in the material plane. So imagine you discarnate, and I use quote because there's a difference between dying and discarnate. You die, but you don't discarnate. You are still here, stuck in the material plane. You cannot follow the light in the end of the tunnel, right? Because of this conflict. Encounters in the spirit world. We often meet those who have unresolved conflicts with after discarnating. Forgiveness facilitates reconciliation and growth in these encounters. So after this fight with Leo, I don't even want to look at him. My only thing with him is wishing him the worst. I want him to die. I only wish him bad things. I don't want to meet him. Oh, maybe you are not meeting him here, but you're going to meet him in the spiritual plane, where you cannot pretend, where you cannot lie, because our thoughts are so clear. There's no way to pretend to dissimulate. Is there such a word in English? Dissipate. Okay, yes, dissipate. So let's remember that. Reincarnation and forgiveness. Through successive lives, we are given opportunities to forgive and be forgiven, mending relationships and fulfilling spiritual debts. So, our reincarnation plan will depend on what we have done here, on what we still need to solve, to resolve in our lives, right? So, the less conflicts are pending to solve in the spiritual plane on afterlife, the better will be your next incarnation, right? And this here is where I think that I used to say that spiritism can be a double-edged sword, because at the same time that this doctrine teaches us that we are not going to hell, we always have an opportunity. That's great. I'm not going to hell forever. At the same time, sometimes I say, you know what? I know that I need to do this, but I won't do in this current life. I wait for another. God is merciful. He's going to give me another opportunity, right? So, practical application. Here are 3 recommendations for us to try to practice forgiveness. Reflecting on past grievances and consciously choosing to release them. Let them go. Don't want to keep attached to them. Seeking forgiveness when we are at fault, showing humility and accountability. So, we have our own faults. So, we too need self-forgiving sometimes. Acting with love and understanding, even toward those who may not yet be ready to seek reconciliation. It's about doing our part. You know what? I'm aware that I did wrong with you. I'm sorry, deeply and honestly sorry. But if you're not able to forgive me, okay, God knows my intentions, right? So, as I was saying, self-forgiveness. We need to remember, we need to know that we too need to be forgiven. And we I lost the word. Yeah, I'm sorry. So we we know that we need forgiveness, and we have the right to seek for forgiveness, right? So it's not worth to keep living and resenting the same thing. Okay, you did it wrong. Move on, right? You already know that it was not right. It was not right. If you have the chance to repair it, take it, do it, right? So you are going to be able to self forgive. So Leo, I think you could say something more about self forgiveness, right?
I'll try.
Okay, come on.
Before, yeah, you want to say something? Oh, right here. Before I talk about self forgiveness, forgive yourself, and you can stand up if you want to. Take a deep breath, move around. Seriously, get up. Let's, because I know it's a little over an hour now. Ooh, move. Daniel's like, oh my gosh, what is Leo doing? Right? Move around a little bit. It's okay. It's okay to stretch and open up your arms if you want to. Drink a sip of water. Those at home, drink a sip of water. This is going to be this part that I'm going to start is going to be the 3 hours of the 17 hours that we're going to be here. No, it's a joke, everyone. It's a joke. As we were stretching, as we were taking a deep breath, I hope that the things that Wendell just brought to us here, these elements, these things, the environment connects back with the parable, right? When we look at the environment, when we were talking about the individuals that were involved, right, on what it does in the environment, think about if the wife of the man who was being judged was there, the children was there, right? When he was being absolved, right, of the wrong, of the debt that he had, right? Imagine what that meant for those individuals, as well as when he did not forgive those other his servant. Imagine what he created in the minds of others. So much so that the people around said, you know what? Wait a minute. Let me talk to the master what he just did. Right? So he created an image for those individuals. And I'm glad that he brought, Wendell brought to us this idea that it leads us into this on what we're going to talk about, which is exactly the self-forgiveness. I want to tell you one story, and it's something that I created in my mind for many, many years, a wrongdoing when I was a child. I mean, I could bring many. I deal with the public. Many of you knows I work in the banking system, and I deal with the public day in, day out. And there were many moments of my life that I have created monsters inside of me. Not the monster of the things that I did, but the things that I didn't do, right? Sometimes we create situations within us that we don't forgive ourselves because we didn't react, right? And then we go back and we tell ourselves, oh my gosh, I should have told this person. I should have hit this person. I should have done at that moment, that heated moment, right? And we don't forgive ourselves. We keep replaying, as Endo said, over and over and over again. And this is not something that we did do. This is something that we did not do, right? And that is such a horrible feeling. And I have many. I mean, we could go over and over and over, right? And there are moments as well of things that we have done, right? That we look back and we're like, oh, that was so bad, right? And it's funny because yesterday I was talking to my mother, and I mentioned this before here. And she reminded me about it. I was like, by the way, we'll talk about this tomorrow when we talk about forgiveness. There was one time, and this is about when I was maybe 8 or 7 years old, and she asked me to get a piece of Brillo. I don't know if many of you saw, like, not the very hard one, but the ones that you can mold it. The old Brillos that we used to use, right? In Brazil, it's very common too nowadays. And she asked me to get a Brillo for her to wash something, to, scrub something. And so I went. When I got the Brillo, I'm coming back to her. I'm like, I'm not going to give it to her that way. I molded the Brillo just as a mice. Yes. So I threw the thing next to her and I told her, the mice. So she's looking at it and she's like, where? And when she went where, she had a bunch of her china next to her and she broke a bunch of her stuff. And guess what? I charged off, right? She comes after me, and as she's doing so, she fell. And I'm like, oh, I'm only making myself. So I look back, I'm like, if I go back, she's going to spank me. She's going to give me all that she has. And I'm like, okay, I'm not going to go. And I'm watching from afar. And for some of you who know my mother, she will tell, that she was she's proud to raise, she was proud to raise us. And she's like, you can run, but you're going to feel hungry again. And you're going to have to come back home to come back inside to eat. And I'm like, when would that be? Maybe half an hour. So it was at the moment it was funny. It is funny now. But at the moment I'm thinking, she fell and I felt horrible. And I'm thinking, maybe I need to go and help her, maybe. And I didn't go because I was afraid. So there was nothing that I could do. In any case, time goes on. I carry that over me. Now we laugh. And now I can look back. And as a father, I'm thinking, if my kids were to do that to me nowadays, my Lord. It would be funny, obviously. But then again, there is a price to pay for all that. I'm saying this because as a child, that kept replaying in my mind as well. Even after everything was okay, even after she laid her intentions on me, let's call it that way, right? Even after I ate as well, my stomach was, doing well, but still I was hurting. And they carry that hurt with me because I'm thinking, I hurt my mother, right? Not many kids will think that way, and I'm not really tapping myself in the back saying that I was thinking about that, but it's something that I carry with me. And many of us will look back in our lives, will have those moments that we have done something wrong, intentionally or not, to hurt others, right? And we're going to go back and say, oh my gosh, why did I do this? And when we look back on the idea as Jesus brings to us, right, that we are thrown in that dungeon, that is the dungeon. It's that timeless dungeon that we live in, that we keep reliving that moment over and over and over again. It could be something that is only about 7 years, 3 years, but for us, it feels like an eternity. It's not that there is God, that Jesus is presenting this God that is very, this horrible God. No, because he could not talk to us like Joanna D'Angelo talks to us nowadays. And it's not that Joanna D'Angelo is greater than Jesus. But now we have the language. Now we have the understanding to accept that it's not God, but it's what inside of us. It's the dungeons that we create in here and in here. It's not that God is relegating us to another planet because we deserve. No, it's how we attune with one another. And if we have inside of us, or let's say, if we lack forgiveness within us, it's going to be very hard to look at you or anybody and say, I forgive you. So there are some elements that we want to bring in this idea of self-forgiveness that is very important. One we already have said, which is we're going to bring from question 192 of the Spirit's book. It's the idea that we are perfect, or that we can get to perfection after we cross this door talking about forgiveness. It's not going to happen. The question is, through perfect conduct in this life, can we clear all the degrees and become pure spirit without having passed through the intermediate ones? The Spirit's answer, no, because what individuals imagine as perfection is actually very far from it. There are qualities that we neither know about nor comprehend. They may be as perfect as their nature permits, but it is not absolute perfection. So if we're looking perfection within us, guess what? We're not going to find it. And if we cannot find it within ourselves, I'm not going to be able to find Miss Paula, Marcelo, Daniel, nobody. We're vibrating the same way. We're in the same boat. Perhaps I'm not going to be adulterous, but I'm going to be something else. Perhaps I'm not going to be the most loving, kind person, right? But I'm going to be something else. So why can we expect ourselves to be, or others to be this way? It's not going to happen. It's a fallacy for us to live that way. If we take that out of the equation, perhaps we'll be able to solve the problem, the mathematical problem. And then there's another one, guilt. And Joana de Angel in this book, unfortunately not in English yet, called Love, Unstoppable Love, or in Portuguese, Amor Imbatível Amor, she says the following. Guilt comes from a peculiar feeling of doing something wrong and how this behavior affects other people. Most likely, it's not going to be if it is wrong or not, or wrong, but what other people will say. Nobody's watching, guess what? Let's do it, right? If nobody can see my innermost, issues, right? Let's do it. But our conscience will speak louder, right? So this is a little bit reversed. So I'm going to go ahead and put I should have put these two paragraphs because one comes before the other, sorry. But they complement one another. And I'll start them down the bottom. When the ego is healthy, our ego is healthy, it faces the situation of error naturally because it understands that the concepts of right and wrong are abstract. And it is up to it to discern what will bring the best results for itself and for others, therefore allowing itself the right to make mistakes and imposing on itself the duty to correct. When I start treating the ego in a way where I can look at it and say, I made a mistake towards my mother, that was a wrong act, I'm going to go ahead and take care of it. Now, will I be able to go back to that moment and take care of that moment, that situation? Now, perhaps I can buy new china for her nowadays because now I earn a salary. I can go ahead and give her things. And I can say to her, this is to replace what I broke in the past, right? Perhaps I can mold a nice Brillo to her instead of a mice, right? That will still perhaps not be the right gift, but I'm just giving examples of things that we can do to perhaps make it right. What if my mother was not alone, was still not with me anymore? God is graceful because we can help another mother. We can help those, we can accept, as Jesus mentioned to John, here's your mother, right? In the cross, and say, Mother, here's your son, right? We are giving the opportunities to make it right, even though that individual is no longer with us. But God reminds us in chapter 10 of the Gospel according to Spiritism that go, leave your offerings in the altar, right? And go reconcile before it's too late. So it has to happen now. And it has to happen with us. We're talking about self-forgiveness now, right? And then she says something really interesting. And this is the cycle that kind of connects to what Wendell was talking about as well. Any human relationship is established within the guidelines of pleasure and emotional compensation it provides. I'll give it to you, give it back to me, so on and so forth, or vice versa. When guilt arises, this structure is fragmented, altering the individual's behavior. The feeling of guilt presents a conflicting element that is the resentment of the one who errs towards the other person he or she has hurt, often leading to a reciprocal situation. So instead of connecting with the other person and saying I'm sorry or receiving the forgiveness, we start fighting. And what was supposed to be one-way road to say, I forgive you, or I receive the forgiveness, we start fighting. We start creating things towards the other that shouldn't exist. And we're doing this to ourselves. I propose to the other Leo, right? To say, I'm not going to forgive you. You have done something wrong. That 70-year-old Leo is never forgiven. And how many years we will carry that with us? That same proposal is now reflecting on the situations of a 46-year-old man, because I never forgiven that 7-year-old. And it happens. And then by the time I'm 79, same thing will happen until the day we say, no, I don't have to carry this grudge anymore. That is why for many family members, when we talk about, and this is embracing in a good way, the Latin culture, we talk about, therapy, right? Psychological therapy. They're like, no, I don't need this, right? The other hurt me. Why do I have to pay for a psychologist? Which is true. It makes sense, right? But we need to take care of this inner being. We need to allow ourselves to say, I forgive myself. I did something wrong. But it's fine because I did not know any better. And it is these feelings, it is the moments that perhaps that I didn't say something to a client, I didn't say something to a customer, that nowadays I have the ability when things get heated, when a conversation, that I look at the client and say, look, I didn't come here. And I have actually got to the point to say, I don't get paid to take your bad mouthing. It is true. I have a way, I have the capability, I have the right to defend myself. We have the right to do so. But our firmness on how we say it, how we present it, delicate, eloquently, an educated way will solve the issue. And most of the time, they settle down. But if it wasn't for those moments, I would still be proposing myself the things that perhaps I would then regret later on. You get what I'm saying? So, the idea of self-forgiveness, it's extremely important. In this amazing book, also, unfortunately not in Portuguese, by the Spirit Hamed from Francisco do Espírito Santo Neto, this passage talks about forgiveness, but he very well talks about the self-forgiveness. The title of the book is Pleasures of the Soul. He says the following: self-forgiveness consists of doing our best today, letting go of past hurts and healing present pains, and at the same time legitimatizing, our life projects for the future. Self-forgiveness is a state of mind that emerges from our innermost being, making us accept everything we are without any prejudice. It is when we begin to understand that our apparent defects are solely and exclusively potential to be developed. Incidentally, hasty judgment can become a failure to understand, because forgiveness is, above all, the ability to understand difficulties. So it's an opportunity. Think of an error that we committed in the past, of something that we have done, as an opportunity. And if I can accept that as a moment as a baseline, as we also study in business, you look at that moment where you are, you have a company that you produce a product, a remote control, and you say, okay, how many units can I produce did I produce in 2024? I produced 3,000 units. And how much did it cost me to make those 3,000 units? And obviously, what was the profit that I made on those 3,000 units? 2024 becomes a line, a baseline. 2025, the projection will be off of that baseline that we're going to produce 4,000 units. We're going to spend less money so we can make it a higher profit. That's how business pretty much moves, right? There's nothing wrong with that, because everyone wants to make a little bit more, especially if the product is something that will make our lives easier. I don't have to go over there, turn it off, and whatnot. And it's the same thing with our lives. 2024, I had these moments that were very difficult. I don't want to go there anymore. I don't want to go in that hurt anymore. That is my baseline. I will do better next time. Whether the other person will help me or not by forgiving me. But I have to forgive myself. I have to give myself the chance to say, I'm better than this, right? To finalize, it says, forgiving ourselves leads to the cultivation of love for ourselves and consequently for others. So if it happens within me, it will happen towards others. In short, it is the basis that keeps humanity united in solidarity. Self-forgiveness leads us to full acceptance of our undeveloped potential, whether intellectual, psychic, and emotional in nature, and to a great understanding that evolutionary experiences are nothing more than the sum of successes and mistakes of the past and the present. And to finalize his thought, he brings this passage of the Spirit's book, when the answer of it is very beautiful. And in this topic, I would like to say that many of us, especially myself, we contradict what we learn with Spiritism. We contradict what Jesus brought to us, which other beautiful minds have brought to us, that God loves us. The question is the duration of suffering of the guilty in the future life arbitrary or subordinate to some law? So in other words, is God imposing time on our suffering? Is God dictating that you will suffer for 10 million years or 10 minutes? No. The answer is beautiful because it says God never acts capriciously, and everything in the universe is ruled by laws that reveal the divine wisdom and goodness. It puts the responsibility back on us. Because if there was such a law to say you will suffer for a specific amount of time, then God is not just. Because if I go and if you cut my finger and I go and say, look, what you did is wrong. I don't have a finger, but now you need to help me, for us to gather things together because that finger is missing, right? Let's work together, right? Then I'll give a different connotation to that hurt. And we will see the divine flourishing on all of us. So before we can do all the things, accept all the things, and exercise the things that we have brought here, we have to acknowledge this. Otherwise, we will be in the dungeon that the servant was thrown into. Not that God will throw us in there, but we will do to ourselves. And we will be reliving that moment, right? So on this ideal, what are the stages that we get to it so we're not there?
Yeah, let's think about it. Guys, to wrap it up, the first part before going to break. No, I'm kidding. I saw Miss Paula desperate now. We are going to talk about the stages of forgiveness. I'm going to share this story with you guys. I'm quite sure you have never heard about it because I made it up. That's a creation from my mind just to talk about this last topic. So let's imagine that Paul is a very evolved spirit. Paul has already learned how to forgive. But before reaching this level of evolution regarding forgiveness, Paul went through some other stages in different incarnations. On the first stage, Paul had his son murdered by his neighbor Jack. Then, in retaliation, Paul murdered Jack's son. An eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. On the next stage, Paul had his son murdered by Jack. Paul didn't do the same to Jack's son, but the child was murdered by someone else. Paul was really happy about it and went to visit Jack in jail and said to his face, "Serves you right." On the next stage, Paul had his son murdered by Jack. Paul didn't kill Jack's son, but he died from an accident. When Paul was told about it, he said, "You know what? I'm not interested in this person's life. I don't want to know." On the next stage, Paul had his son murdered by Jack. Paul didn't kill Jack's son, but he died from an accident. Paul felt sorry about Jack, but when had the opportunity to tell him, he was silent. On the next stage, Paul had his son murdered by Jack. Paul didn't murder Jack's son. Jack's son became very sick and needed medical treatment, but Jack was in prison and couldn't afford it. When Paul became aware of it, made a donation to Jack's family without letting them know it was him, and saved the life of the child of the man who killed his son. I have always thought about these stages, these levels of forgiveness. because we can see that the first stage is the lowest. It means not forgiving. It means revenging. And the last level is the true forgiving. When you forgive to the point that now you help your offender. And why did I decide to bring this idea to you guys? For us to think, what is the stage we are right now? Because if we are not in the first stage, if we are not in the second stage, maybe if we are in this third stage, maybe we are all right. We know that we need to go further, but we have to look back and see and realize that we have been worse, because now we are living our best version, right? So, forgiving someone, realizing that you have done it, is an act that makes the best for you, not to your offender. Because as Leo said before, my offender, who I don't forgive, may have had God's forgiven. And what is more important, God's forgiven or mine? So that's what I want you guys to think about, to reflect on. That when we forgive someone, it's to us that we are doing good, right? That's why is it so important to forgive, right? So thank you so much. Leo is going to come in back here now because we're going to open the mic for him to answer your questions. Thank you.
No, I also want to thank everyone for and first of all Wendell for partaking with this this is it good there, Daniel? This challenge, which is to we can take one back and still keep on the question. This challenge to work on this, because it's not easy, as we have said at the beginning. It's not something that we have mastered, that we're still working. And I think it serves more for us than anybody, because we're presenting. So now, when we're being looked at by our spiritual friends, our mentors, right? As well as those that we still things to correct, right? To make sure that we are forgiving, right? To give the example so that we are not going, we don't go back to the master and the master look at us and say, I just forgive you guys. What's going on, right? You gave that talk. So more work for us to do. But we would like to open for questions, comments that you may have. I'll come and bring the microphone for those as well online who may have questions and comments. Huh? Oh, you want to? Okay.
Was very nice, Leo, Wendell. Thanks so much. Thank you. And Wendell was very good. The little thing you put in the final, because was in my mind when you ask us, do something wrong to us, leave to God. God's gonna be the judge. And I was thinking myself, oh, maybe God's gonna punish him, gonna do something bad to him. And it was, was my question to you. But when you put everything there, that's it. Does it have God involved in that situation? Was ourselves getting better and better and better until the end? Beautiful. Thanks so much. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Janet, for the question. We need to remember that in one way or another, we're going to have to repair what we did wrong, right? There is a chapter in the gospel, according to Spiritism, that says about the scandals, right? That scandals are still necessary for us to improve our progress. And we need to understand scandals not as just as what the word means, but scandals as every bad action that can happen to us. They are still necessary. But the ones who decide to be in charge of the scandals, this is going to be punished in the future, right? Because if I did some bad to you and you decide not to revenge, I will still have to pay. I will still have to account this debt that I acquired, right? But you don't need to charge me. You don't need to be the one to collect this debt, right? Because life, it's going to take charge. Who's going to be in charge of it? So when you say let to God, it's because God is this perfection. God is the universe, and everything's going to happen naturally in order for me to be charged, to pay for what I did. So Thank you so much.
Thank you, Wendell. Paula?
Okay. Hello. Thank you. Thank you both. It made me think that we should put forgiveness right with kindness in the preschool curriculum, because the sooner the better. Um, and I also have a couple thoughts. I'm struck with the number forgive 77 times. And it happened to me this afternoon because a friend called and offered me free tickets to a concert, which would have meant I wouldn't have been here. So I turned it down because I have a crush on Wendell and I know he's not going to talk that much longer. But what happened was a performer in this concert was my original hammer dulcimer teacher. And I had great anxiety when I had lessons. It just, we weren't a good chemistry. And I thought I had forgiven him. But the thought of sitting here watching him perform for 2 hours was the other reason I didn't attend. So you get reminders that you have another level of forgiveness to go through. My comment on the parable, I realized it was a certain time period where like certain people didn't have as much value, but I'm wondering why the master, and he was angry, had this man tortured. I mean, wouldn't imprisonment have been enough? I know that was your turn. You presented the parable. Didn't that seem harsh to torture?
Parables, or as we have mentioned before, and thanks for the question, because this is a very important. Okay. He's like, get me out of here. Parables or stories or that are meant for us to learn from that environment, from that story, if we can call that way, right? Much like we tell our children stories for them to learn a specific topic, such as forgiveness, right? Kindness and all those things. Jesus was using all those moments to do the same thing. Let us think of the hurt, of the moments that we create for ourselves, right? Would it be enough? And I want to go back, Daniel. I know we're pressed with time here. I just want to go back because this is truly important. Because as we study the parables and the teachings of Christ, it reminds us of our relationship with God. That's why I emphasize on 10,000 bags of gold that was owed versus the 10 coins, right? No, I'm sorry, 100 silver coins, okay? Here, he was forgiven. And for much less, he did not forgive. Then Jesus come and say, you're going to be shackled, you're going to do this, so on and so forth, right? For much less, he choked the man. This beautiful painting by Domenico Ferri shows him choking this guy for much less. And he had just been forgiven. Did God do this to him? This is an analogy, or this is perhaps a story that Jesus brings to us, that what's going to happen with him, because he's vibrating in the sense that he cannot forgive, as if he was tortured and imprisoned, and time is now taking forever, and he's there for a long time. I get the point, what you're saying. It's not necessary, but it depends on the person. It doesn't depend on God. Much like Jeanette said, when Wendell brought these steps, God was out of the equation. God created the law, and God allows us, through our free will, to decide, how long am I going to be with that hurt? How long it's going to take, especially when I was forgiven for way more. I didn't forgive the other one for only 100 coins, to decide that I can do the same and forgive. So that's why we vibrate this way. That's why we are tortured by the jailers. It's our conscience. It's our heart. It's how we vibrate. One can say it has nothing to do with God. It has, because God, at the end, created the natural laws. But if we go to the third part of the Spirit's book and we study the natural laws, we will see that there's nothing being imposed, number one, and they're very freeing. Because at the moment that I look at stop sign and I say, I will stop. Because if I cross the stop sign and I hit a car, I'll be responsible. And I will go to jail for infringing that law because it becomes a guidance, right? Let's rename it a guidance, that if that car has a child in it, if that inside of that car has a father who's coming back from work to see his children, and I did not stop in the stop sign. And then obviously I'm taking this in consideration that if it was done maliciously, right? Because some of us, I have forgot about the stop sign and I passed the stop sign. You know, it's an honest mistake, right? But I'm talking about maliciously. Because here, the intent is to show that this man had just been forgiven. And he was given the opportunity to do the same, and he didn't. So he maliciously did not forgive. Sorry about the sound. I hope that makes it clear, because we bring God into the equation in the sense that we're giving the opportunity, not that we are thrown into the dungeon. Because when we hear Jesus saying the master, he's referring to God, right? He's referring to our Creator, right? But many, many times, the master as well is our conscience that will throw us in there. Hopefully that clears up, and that can free us as well, and that can get us closer to God. Not a God that is punishing, but a God that is everlasting loving. I know Daniel has 2 more online. So should I get out of this? So Chris asks, what about people who say they forgive people, but then they cut the offenders out of their lives? For example, people who stop talking to their own family, like parents, siblings, and etc. Psychology tells us that avoid toxic people, including family, whereas Jesus, Christianity, Spiritism tells us to love one another and honor their family. How do people learn to reconcile and maintain relationships, even if people think those relationships may not be good for them? How can we explain forgiveness? And the next one, Daniel. How do we explain forgiveness and reconciliation to non-spiritist people, to people that may be religious but are just looking at things from a psychological perspective? i.e., removing so-called toxic people, including family, from their lives. Jesus said to honor our family and love one another. But how can people reconcile relationships in the current life since they don't believe in reincarnation? Wow, quite a bit. Would you like to take, or want to? All right. He's like, go ahead. If something happens to us, and or if we do something to somebody, towards somebody, let's start that way, and whatever that may be, Chris, and all of us here as well. The idea of that we mentioned earlier of repentance, right? Expiation and reparation is up to us. And that happens independently if the other person forgives us or not. The choice is, forgiveness is not, and this is something that I should have added to, that the other person should walk the road with me. No. The teaching is give the other face when you get slapped on get the other side of your face when you get slapped on the other side, right? That doesn't mean in literal terms, right? But we'll give the person the opportunity to continue on, right? And if we don't receive, if we're not forgiven and people would like to exclude us from their lives, it's a choice that they have. I don't believe that is forgiveness. Because the same way that we cannot forget things, we cannot also exclude, people and things from our lives. Because guess what? Perhaps they're not going to be dealing with you, but because we live on planet Earth, they're not going to a beautiful planet, Jupiter, right? That is more evolved. They will have to deal with people just like you and I that will do perhaps the same mistakes or even worse, but it's their choice. So our pride says what? We want everybody to be next to us, right? We want to be understood by everybody. No, it's a fallacy also to believe that people they have to forgive us, they have to continue walking the same path. What about a husband or a wife who is cheated on, right? And they decide, I forgive you, but I don't want to live with you anymore. There's nothing wrong with that. What if you have a partnership in which you have a business that your partner does something wrong and takes you to lose your business? Does that mean that you're going to open other business with that person? No. And guess what? You will also want to be away from that person, right? It will take time for you to heal that situation, right? It will be in a situation where if you have to take the next step to even take a new job, because now you're out of business, now you have to work for someone else, you're going to be, oh my gosh, no, maybe this person's going to be just like John, who took away my business, right? You'll be thinking the same way. And it's natural. That's when we have to accept the things that happens to us. But we go back to those three elements: repentance, expiation, and a reparation. Whether it's for me that have to work through it or perhaps the other person. And God is so graceful because it will give me the opportunity to do my part even if it isn't with that person. Acknowledging the idea that he brought to us that not everybody's a spiritist. I don't want everybody to be a spiritist because there will be a lot of people saying, as we said earlier, why don't you forgive? You're a spiritist. You're a spiritist. Spiritism is, right? But it doesn't matter if we're a spiritist or not. It doesn't matter if people don't have the concept of the before, during, and after. The responsibility that reincarnation brings to us is not for everybody, right? But our actions will speak louder than our labels. I can remind people that I'm a very responsible person without saying that I'm a spiritist. I can remind people that I am a Christian, a Buddhist, or whatever it is, then when I make a mistake and say, I'm sorry, I dropped the ball. And I know that you will need your time. And I know that your feelings right now is to run away from me because I am a monster for you right now. And it's okay. And it'll probably hurt a lot to say such a thing, to acknowledge such a thing. And our pride is going to be diminished, right? Smashed. But that will speak louder because in the future, right, that person will look back and say, wow, what a courage. I haven't done it. Many times I hide as well. I go back to what Joanna de Angelis was saying to us. The guilt is so acute that I start, bargaining with the other individual. If the person say this to me or that, and then we go back to the vicious circles, right, of life. Hopefully this helps. I know we're past with time, but go ahead.
If I could add something to Chris' question about how to speak about forgiveness to non-spiritist people. We brought some scientific aspects to our lecture here, right? We talked about the benefits to your health through forgiveness. This is science, right? So it's a good way to approach. It's a good approach, I guess. So you don't have to talk about gospel or Jesus or God, but you can bring the scientific aspect and talk to them about it in a way that it makes sense to them, right? That's it.
Thank you, Wendell. And again, Chris, we hope that this helps. And as to finalize this, let us put this, I know we spoke about a lot of things, and it's about 2 hours speaking, and we went a little bit over 1 hour and the 45 minutes that we spoke, but I think I hope it is helpful. And I hope that amongst all the things that we have said, we connect with God in a higher tone, right? We connect with ourselves in a higher tone, right? And we take that baggage that I mentioned earlier, right? And look at it and say, not anymore. I'm not going to carry that with me. That burden that we have brought with us into 2024, right? it stays behind. And that we look at the other moments that we were forgiven, that we were given the grace of God to restart again, right? To look at our situation and say, get up, move on, is what is clear in our minds, right? That we can take care of our ego and say, wait a minute, this is good. This is an opportunity that I have in my life now, that I can go on, that as Wendell mentioned to us, that if I tried, at least try to do the right things, my son, my daughter, my niece, my brother, my sister, whoever, somebody on the street will be looking at me and they're going to say, wow, if that guy can do it, I can do it too. If that lady can do it, I can do it too. And we multiply this. And ultimately, it becomes, as Paula said, kindness, right? A moment of kindness. People may not even label as forgiveness, right? It was a kind moment, right? And as we come again closer to the end of the year in this ideal of Christmas, you know, the festivities, the new start, right? Let this be a moment, a perennial, as Kirsten mentioned to us last week, a perennial moment of our lives that comes back often, right? That we look back 2 months from now and say, it's Christmas again because I was able to forgive. It's Christmas again, that now I can look back at that situation and say, I'm sorry. I was wrong, right? But I would like to have an opportunity to make amends again to that situation, to that environment that we created here, that we brought it here. Thank you so much.